Great. Wow, we have a lot of people from all over and who vote all over. While we're waiting to get started, someone's gonna put the ECCC social media accounts into the chat, and it would be super if people would follow, subscribe, whatever you need to do to subscribe. It's important that we get our message out, and since we're a new caucus council, we don't have a lot of followers yet, so please subscribe. We're going to begin with an important message from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
The jury has reached a verdict, and it is damning. This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a litany of broken climate promises. It is a file of shame, cataloguing the empty pledges that put us firmly on track towards an unlivable world. We are on a fast track to climate disaster. Major cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration. It is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies. We are on a pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5-degree limit agreed in Paris. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. This is a climate emergency. Climate scientists warn that we are already perilously close to tipping points that could lead to cascading and irreversible climate impacts. But high-emitting governments and corporations are not just turning a blind eye. They are adding fuel to the flames. They are choking our planet based on their vested interests and historic investments in fossil fuels, when cheaper, renewable solutions provide green jobs, energy security, and greater price stability. We left COP26 in Glasgow with a naive optimism based on new promises and commitments. But the main problem, the enormous growing emissions gap, was all but ignored. And the science is clear. To keep the 1.5-degree limit agreed in Paris within reach, we need to cut global emissions by 45% this decade. But current climate pledges would mean a 14% increase in emissions. And most major emitters are not taking the steps needed to fulfill even these inadequate promises. Climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals. But the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. Investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. Such investments will soon be stranded assets, a blot on the landscape and a blight on investment portfolios. But it doesn't have to be this way. Today's report is focused on mitigation, cutting emissions. It sets out viable, financially sound options in every sector that can keep the possibility of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees alive. First and foremost, we must triple the speed of the shift to renewable energy. And that means moving investments and subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables now. In most cases, renewables are already far cheaper. It means governments ending the funding of coal, not just abroad, but at home. And it means climate coalitions made up of developed countries, multilateral development banks, private financial institutions, and corporations with adequate technologies supporting major emerging economies in making this shift. It means protecting forests and ecosystems as powerful climate solutions. It means rapid progress in reducing methane emissions. And it means implementing the pledges made in Paris and Glasgow. Leaders must lead. But all of us can do our part. We owe a debt to young people, civil society, and indigenous communities for sounding the alarm and holding leaders accountable. We need to build on their work to create a grassroots movement that cannot be ignored. If you live in a big city, a rural area, or a small island state, if you invest in the stock market, if you care about justice and our children's future, I am appealing directly to you. Demand that renewable energy is introduced now at speed and at scale. Demand an end to coal-fired power. Demand an end to all fossil fuel subsidies. Today's report comes at a time of global turbulence. Inequalities are at unprecedented levels. The recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is scandalously uneven. Inflation is rising, and the war in Ukraine is causing food and energy prices to skyrocket. But increasing fossil fuel production will only make matters worse. Choices made by countries now will make or break the commitment to 1.5 degrees. A shift to renewables will mend our broken global energy mix and offer hope to millions of people suffering climate impacts today. Climate promises and plans must be turned into reality and action now. It's time to stop burning our planet and start investing in the abundant renewable energy all around us.
Indeed. Welcome to our global climate rally, CO2 Consequences. I am Dana Freling, a Texas voter residing in Finland and chair of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council. In partnership with the Progressive Caucus, we are presenting a rousing lineup of speakers and performers to marshal all of you around the world to help combat climate change and preserve our beautiful planet for generations to come. The battle to contain climate change will be won or lost in this decade, and the 2022 election results will, in a real sense, determine whether the U.S. can fulfill its pledge to be a leader in the drive to stave off the most catastrophic consequences of global warming. Candidates elected this year will steer the direction of U.S. policy in the lead up to 2025, a significant deadline set out in this month's report by the IPCC. That's when greenhouse gas emissions need to peak if the world hopes to meet the Paris Climate Accord goal of holding temperature increase close to 1.5 degrees. The U.S. won't be able to curb its reliance on fossil fuels without more climate leadership in Congress and at every level of government. Despite Biden's ambitious climate goals, legislation is stalled in the closely divided Senate, especially as he faces mounting pressure to expand fossil fuel production to both rein in inflation and address energy security concerns amid Russia's insidious war on Ukraine. We have the tools to solve our massive challenges, but we need the political will. A new industrial revolution powered by millions of sustainable innovations is already underway. We will all share in these benefits: affordable, clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Biden's infrastructure bill is already creating jobs in manufacturing of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and electric vehicles, and building out the first ever national network of charging stations. But the $500 billion climate component of Build Back Better must also be passed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below levels of 2005 by the end of the decade. We invite you all to help build a sustainable world in your everyday lives, but also with your vote. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. Let us be that blue drop of democratic ink in a glass of water, ultimately turning our planet green. Now we are honored to hear from DA's esteemed International Vice Chair, Art Schankler. Art, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks. Thank you, Dana. Sorry, somebody muted me. I just want to say on on behalf of Democrats abroad, and especially our chair, Candace Carriston, who unfortunately can't join us today because she's not feeling so well, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today to participate in this very important call to action in the midst of our planetary climate emergency during this Earth Month and beyond. Democrats Abroad's Environment and Climate Crisis Council and the Progressive Caucus have organized an inspiring roster of speakers and performers to help rally our troops globally. And I want to thank all of the participants, both from within DA, like David Miller and Aaron Fishbone, as well as our many guest speakers and performers who we have with us today. Scientists around the world have confirmed that climate change has been caused by human activity over the last century and a half. Turning this ship around will require immense willpower and ingenuity from both the government and business alike. It's vital that each of us as an individual acts now in small ways and large to preserve our future. And voting for Democrats in the midterms is an important step in making sure that we can have legislation that truly addresses climate change. If you haven't already requested your absentee ballot, today is a great day to do it at votefromabroad.org, and I'm sure somebody's going to put that in the chat box. And if you have friends and family living overseas, encourage them to do the same. And if you can, do more than encourage, because every vote really does count, as we've seen in recent elections. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Democrats Abroad is the largest organization of US citizens outside of the United States. We're an official arm of the Democratic Party. If you aren't yet a member, I encourage you to join today at www.democratsabroad.org. And I know someone's going to put that in the chat box as well. I would just like to also mention that one of the big changes in Democrats Abroad over the last few years has been the creation and growth of our caucuses and councils, recognizing that overseas voters really do care about the issues that affect all of us. The ECCC itself was only recently formed, but it provides a forum for action on issues that perhaps uniquely affect and impact all Americans living overseas, as well as Americans in the US. These are issues that we can all unite behind, no matter who we are or where we live on this planet. I just want to take a moment to congratulate Dana on becoming chair and thank her for accepting the challenge of accepting the leadership of this truly important organization within Democrats Abroad. With this in mind, I want to mention that our mission at Democrats Abroad is to provide Americans abroad voice in our government on issues like the climate crisis and the environment, and to elect Democratic candidates by mobilizing the overseas vote. So much is at stake this year in 2022. There are 34 US Senate seats, all 435 US representative seats, 46 state legislatures, and 36 state governorships are up for grabs in November 2022. And we've all seen how important state legislatures and state governors are in determining policy that affects all of us, including on the issue of the climate crisis. I urge all Americans to vote for the future you choose, one that is green and sustainable. Maintaining democratic control of the government is essential to addressing the existential climate issues we are facing today. So again, go to votefromabroad.org and request a ballot if you haven't already done so. And in most states, you can do this by email, so there's no paper wasted or trees injured. With that, I will turn it back to Dana Freling to introduce our first speaker, Michelle Deatrick, who I recently had the pleasure of seeing re-elected as the chair of the Democratic National Committee's own ECCC. Over to you, Dana. Thanks very much.
Okay, just a second. Thank you so much, Art, and thank you for your congratulations. I truly am honored, and we have our work cut out for us here for sure, taking on this challenge. But we're in it together. We're all in it together. So next, I would like to introduce Michelle Deatrick. We are deeply honored once again to be joined by the chair and founder of the Democratic National Committee's Environment and Climate Crisis Council, Michelle Regalado Deatrick. We actually modeled our council after the DNCs, and Ms. Deatrick has been extremely helpful and supportive of us as we formed our council. Michelle's work focuses on social and economic justice, women's issues, climate change, and their intersection. She was elected to the Democratic National Committee from Michigan in 2016 and founded the DNC's ECCC in 2019. She was recently re-elected unanimously, which we're grateful for. So she's starting her second term. And thank you so much, Michelle, for taking the time to be with us again today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dana. And hello, Democrats abroad. It is so, so good to be back with you. I'm lucky I get to speak with Democratic groups a lot, but few are as committed, as passionate, and as effective as you all are. And so it's truly an honor to be here with you. And especially to be back with you at such a critical time, because as we all know, everything that we hold dear is going to be on the ballot in just a few short months. The environment, the climate crisis, voting rights, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, the very foundation of our democracy, free and fair election, and it's all on the line this November. I'm Michelle Regalado Deatrick, chair of the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council. I'm speaking to you from Anishinaabe lands on my family's 80-acre farm and native prairie here in what's now called Southeast Michigan. And I know it's an overused line, but it has never been more true. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And we say that every election over the last couple of decades. And the reason is that it's true, is that the scope and scale and intensity of the ongoing crises, including the inequality crisis, the racial injustice crisis, climate and environmental justice crises, and our challenges to democracy, all of those challenges, as you know, are increasing. Imagine Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Imagine Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, leading impeachment hearings against Joe Biden. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocking everything in the Senate even more than he does now. Chairman Ted Cruz, Chairman Josh Hawley, and Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, not as backbenchers, but with seats at the leadership table. That's the reality if we don't win in November. And they will not only stop the Biden agenda in its tracks, they will reverse decades worth of progress. Look at what DeSantis is doing in Florida, Abbott in Texas. Now imagine that at the federal level. And that's what Republican control of Congress will mean. So for the environment and climate crisis, it's going to mean climate deniers will be in charge. It will mean multiple committee chairmen and women who are on the bankroll of the oil companies to an unheard of extent. And it will mean the very worst of the anti-science crew deciding our national policies and doing what they do best, deny, delay, and disrupt the progress we are making toward a renewable, green, sustainable green energy future. It's a near worst case scenario, and it all paves the path toward the return of Trump. We cannot and we must not allow it. For the sake of our country, for the sake of our democracy, we cannot allow it. And I'm so glad to be standing here, metaphorically standing here with you, working alongside you to stop that. So we're going to be running the most aggressive political program in our history. We're going to go all out to educate and turn out voters. We'll go out to train candidates and organize in communities. We will go out to push back on the false narratives and lies and disinformation. And we will go all out to ensure everyone understands what is at stake in this election. And we need you all to go all out too, as in fairness, you already do, because Dems Abroad totally rocks it. You play a critical role in elections. Don't let being a couple or many time zones away deter you from engaging. And every day, literally every day, I am so impressed and grateful for your smart, effective, never flagging organizing. And now more than ever, that is critical. I hold Dems Abroad up as an example many times of an example of what can be done. But it's not just enough to vote. We need to continue and to ramp up organizing and mobilizing, to start calling and texting voters in swing states and districts. We ask that you engage with the council, both Dems Abroad, ECC, and the DNC, ECC, and other party organizations to ensure we protect our congressional majorities. We know that the environmental vote and the Dems Abroad vote and the vote of communities for whom climate and environmental justice are crucial can make the difference in this election as they did in 2020. And we also need, as the Secretary General just said, I love that speech, by the way, thank you for showing it. We need to keep fighting for an end to fossil fuel subsidies, for an urgent transition to safe and renewable energy, for a stop to new fossil fuel infrastructure. And so we all need to go all in. So the armchair pundits, of course, are saying this election is already decided and we have lost. And it is true that history is not on our side about midterms, but change is possible. Change is always possible. And we who care deeply about the future of this planet and its people, we hold on to that hope, that knowledge, and we work for change this election and for the future. You know, when Nelson Mandela was faced with apartheid, he and other leaders of the ANC changed history. Facing the Depression, FDR rolled up his sleeves and changed history in a mostly good way. Rosa Parks and Rachel Carson, they too changed the arc of history. And in our own time, working on environmental justice and fighting the climate crises, we have Erin Brockovich, Peggy Shepard, an amazing heroine in New York of We Act for Environmental Justice, Indigenous water protectors, Sunrise, and other youth leaders, and you, all of you. So I am so excited to hear from the other speakers, from Colette and Art and Andreas and Bill and everyone else. A huge, huge thank you to Dana and Angela and Dash, to the Dems Abroad Progressive Caucus and Bruce, and the others who established and helped with launching this first ever Dems Abroad ECC, strengthening our voice and outreach inside and outside of the party, and our chances of changing the pattern of history in November. History doesn't have to repeat itself, and it all starts, as the Secretary General said, with organizing, with building coalitions and our movement. We can and must prove the pundits wrong. We've done it before, and we're going to do it again this November. So thank you again for all you do. Thank you for all you will do, and we can win, we must, and we're going to. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Democrats Abroad is all in. There's no question. And we're going to get more of our members in volunteering and helping in any way that they can. And we have a suggestion to share with everybody who's on the call today, which is that you can make a difference right now by helping tens of thousands of Americans around the world cast their votes in the midterm elections. You can join our generous donors with a donation of any size, whether it's one time or monthly, and every donation goes straight to funding the tools we need to support our 100% volunteer effort. That's our website, our phone banking and texting platforms, and also advertising to reach hundreds of thousands of overseas American voters and new voters. Please donate today. I'm Sue Alksnis. I'm Vice Chair of the Progressive Caucus, and I'm very pleased now to introduce Andreas Beckmann, who lives in Austria. Andreas is Regional CEO of World Wildlife Fund Central and Eastern Europe, seeking to preserve globally important forests, wetlands, and wildlife, and to promote long-term sustainable local development. Thank you so much, Andreas, for being with us today.
Thanks, Sue. Bruce asked me to speak on my work from my region, and I can't really do that without talking about Ukraine. From day one of this awful war, and actually before that, I've had a second row seat for this unmitigated disaster. I'm sitting in Vienna, but I'm in daily contact with my colleagues in Ukraine, who at this point that the war has uprooted and they've been scattered pretty much across Europe. Reflections on the impacts for climate change very directly, immediately, emissions from the military operations, from forest fires, destruction of fuel depots, I'm sure you've seen on the news, destruction of renewable energy sources. A lot of the solar and wind power, for example, that Ukraine has is located in the southern parts of this country where there's been some of the most intense fighting. About 9% of Ukrainian energy comes from renewables at this point. That amount has been growing rapidly. Unfortunately, that has come to a screeching halt as, of course, because of the war and the need to focus investments elsewhere. But also there's major risks of global repercussions as well. The war in Ukraine has shocked the energy markets, which were already volatile due to the supply chain issues and other complications from the COVID pandemic. And energy security has emerged as the uppermost priority for many countries, especially here in Europe. And this is driving potentially short-term decisions that will have long-term implications for the climate crisis. So decisions taken today will determine very much whether we're locked into a fossil fuel consumption for many years to come. This is, of course, because of the role that Russia plays in the global energy sector. It is the largest exporter of oil in the world. It's the second largest exporter of natural gas, just after the US. And of course, especially important for European countries. About 40% of Europe's natural gas comes from Russia. And sanctions on Russia have pushed up the Brent crude oil prices by more than 60% since the beginning of the year. And this, of course, has sent countries scurrying to shore up domestic energy supplies from other sources. And then, of course, this threatens the radical transformation of the energy system that climate science demands. Until the outbreak of the war here in Europe, the key climate focus was on the Green Deal, the Green New Deal, that aimed to make the EU the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This is now up in the air. We're at a crossroads. There is a push in the urge to find alternative sources to Russian sources for example, open up coal-fired power plants that are either closed or scheduled to be closed in the near future. To rush basically the fossil fuels, to rush backwards. A push to speed up new production of oil and gas in environmentally sensitive areas, such as the Arctic, Africa, Guyana, Suriname. Commitments to more large-scale nuclear power plants and or delaying shutting of operating nuclear facilities. Investments in new fossil fuel infrastructure, such as liquid natural gas terminals, which will have a long lifetime. These are potential reversals of past commitments to a greener future and will undermine global efforts to tackle climate change. There is, of course, the other side in this crossroads, the other direction that we can go, and that is pushing forward even faster towards an energy transition to shift subsidies, as was said, from fossil fuels towards renewables, to invest in energy efficiency, to invest in massive awareness campaigns and energy efficiency. These are possibilities not only for taking action for climate, but also for addressing security concerns, to getting us off of fossil fuels from Russia and other autocratic governments, to get us off of financially contributing to war and to human rights abuses, but also their investments in employment in the future. Also decentralizing energy supplies. So for all those reasons, those are very positive ways in terms of increasing our security, as well as investing in the future in terms of climate action. The war in Ukraine has highlighted to the world the global need for a cleaner energy future. The current global turmoil only underlines the importance of taking action now to find sustainable energy solutions. If I can say a final word just about the role of the US with regard to addressing climate change and why it's so important for all of us to get out the vote. I don't need to say to you the importance of the role of the US in terms of reducing actual emissions, of our credibility, of doing this also for being able to play a leadership role on the global stage. Decisions in Washington also have other far-reaching consequences, including in my own region. Politicians here are finely tuned, especially in Eastern European countries like Ukraine, are finely tuned to the music coming out of Washington. And it's also decisions in Washington that determine, not least, U.S. support. So for example, under the previous administration, USAID projects could not mention, let alone address, climate change. So project officers, in many cases, had to bend over backwards to describe important work using other terms. Thankfully, those project officers were still there and able to do that. Just one small example of why it is important, the outcomes of elections in Washington do matter. As Democrats abroad, I think the most effective thing that we can do is simply to get out the vote. Only 7.8% of eligible Americans abroad actually vote, and the vast majority do not. A lot, if not most of those, are sympathetic to Democrats. So we can make, and we have made, I'm very happy to say, a real difference simply by getting to those sympathizers, getting them to actually vote. So please grab your smartphone, your laptop, or whatever you need, and phone bank like hell this coming election season. Thanks.
Thank you, Andreas. Yes, everyone needs to vote and do whatever we can to get the vote out. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to let everybody know that the ECCC has put together a Earth Day and Beyond toolkit with suggestions of things that every person can do to make a difference in the fight against climate change and to change their behaviors that are not difficult. The link is in the chat, so please take a look and let's make the world a better place. Our next speaker is Anthony Akerman, a native Californian, now residing in England for over 25 years. He's worked in global supply chain logistics. He has worked to reduce the footprint, waste, and emissions of multiple multinational corporations. Outside of his employment, he's also a member of our ECCC steering committee, and he is a staunch campaigner in the fight against climate change. Anthony?
Great, thanks, Angela. Yes, I think it was really interesting with Anthony Guterres's initial discussion where he's talking about the weather patterns are already there, right? We have extreme weather, wildfires, melting of ice caps, and we're at the incredibly unfortunate situation that we can't stop climate change, we can't reverse it, but we can mitigate the damage that's being done. And what gives me hope actually is that there are a lot of technologies that we can do right now to decarbonize our whole supply chain. And it's not stuff that we're looking at doing in 2030 or 2050, it's stuff that we can do right now today. You can take coal and take a low carbon coal, which is what basically you make steel out of. You can carbon capture that coal as you make it into steel, and that's the main component of a car. Now, people's concerns often is when you look at sustainability, you're looking at not just the environmental aspect, the ethical part, but also the economic part. So when you take low carbon steel, it's going to cost you about 40% more. But the input into the car is insignificant when you actually add up all the components. And so your final costings aren't actually that high. So we do the same thing with shipping and logistics. We're using biodiesel, and biodiesel allows you to use cooking oil, for example, put it in the engine of your ships, run on zero. We have green methanol ships coming out as well, which will run at zero. I think the main thing is that you do have an economic cost on it, and I think that's what puts off a lot of people. But when you do take in all these cost and components of everything, you're looking at a between 1% to 4% increase in actually buying the product. So we can actually make cars that have been used no carbons to actually make. And instead of being about a $30,000 car, you're going to pay an extra $600. In a pair of jeans, if you take a container and you pay the additional for an alternative fuel, it might add an extra $500 or $600 onto that container. But with 10,000 units in that container, you're talking about less than half of 1 cent per pair of jeans. So, you know, your average $40 pair of jeans, you'll have to pay an extra $1 for. And maybe your iPhone, that you pay $600 or so for, you'll have to end up paying an extra $10. These are choices that we can make now. We can drive business to make these changes, and it's all available right now today. And I think we have to also push politicians too. We need to look at carbon taxes as well. So if you take a carbon tax in, it'll actually offset anybody who wants to sort of cheat the system by offering unsustainable products. And I think as an individual, everybody has to actually choose those products wisely, and you can make an impact now. You can get everything down to sort of a net zero position if we actually push for it now. And I'd like to see some of the politicians really focusing and pushing for that carbon tax. But we can make changes today. And I think the exciting thing is if we can get people to realize what they need to do, you can actually step in and you can actually make these kind of changes as we're going right now. So there is the opportunity and there's the availability. But your voice needs to be heard. You need to let people know, you need to let business know and the politicians know that this is important. You don't want anybody to make products. You don't want to buy anything that actually is making the planet worse. You want to keep everything at least on a carbon neutral basis. And with that, I'll hand it back and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That was fascinating. And I agree. It takes everybody. It takes industry. It takes business. It takes government, and it takes individuals with their decisions. So thank you very much. Next, I'm going to introduce a very special piece, which is a performance. But first, I would like to remind you or to introduce you to a petition that the ECCC has put together calling for a national climate emergency in the United States. This is going to be distributed all over the world to our members and turned in June to the office of President Biden and Kamala Harris and to Congress. And I want everybody and Democrats abroad all over the world to have their voices heard, because a national climate emergency needs to be called. To second some of the members of Congress who have called for a similar climate emergency. Our moderator will put that in the chat now. And then I would like to tell you about our very special performance coming up. There will be a monologue, which was written by Mindy Dickstein and performed by Ross Tatum, called Starving to Death in Midtown. It's based on actual events of a struggling bee colony in Midtown Manhattan during the summer of 2015. It has a special resonance today. Ross Tatum has a long career in theater and TV and has taught acting and directing in mainstream productions and at the Fame School in New York City, which I think is quite well known. The writer of the piece, Mindy Dickstein, is an award-winning lyricist, librettist, and playwright whose works include the book for Toy Story. So now there have been technical difficulties in Costa Rica, where they reside. So they have provided a video to show for us today. Unfortunately, this was just bad timing for Wi-Fi connection in Costa Rica, but we'll get to see now the video. So thank you, Caroline, for playing that.
Spare change to save the bees. Save the bees. Spare change to save the bees. Oh, thank you, sir. God bless you. God bless. Hey, did you hear about what happened this summer in New York City? No? Well, let me tell you. Let me, how you say, fill you in. The bees, my people, as it were, well, we're not actually people, but I'm going to speak to you in terms that you can understand. So I'm saying people so that maybe you can, relate. I'm not going to buzz. And there will be no cute little yellow and black striped suit, no antennae to make it easier for you to distance yourself from me, to make it possible for you to say, well, hey, He's only a bee. What you see here is, if you will, the essence of the bees. Me. I am the essence of the bees. I am the voice of my people, and my people are the bees of Midtown Manhattan. So, August 2015, here's the situation. Pollution, pesticides, a dwindling source of basic flower nectar citywide. Do I have to paint you a picture? This is not about pastrami, okay? And this is not about the disappearance of your favorite sushi bar you went to for 30 years. It just got shut down to make room for another phone company store. And it's not about how the food on the Lower East Side ain't what it used to be, or how you can't get a good pickle anymore. This is about poison. Stuff that's getting sprayed on my food, my home, and it's killing me. If you don't believe me, check out this Harvard study, published in the June 2015 edition of the Bulletin of Insectology. Insectology, nice word, right? Well, it says here that Harvard has found irrefutable proof that, and I quote, sublethal exposure to neonicotinoids is likely the main culprit for the occurrence of colony collapse disorder. And when they say colony, they mean bees, my bees, which is to say my colony. CCD. That's right. It's so common, it has an acronym. CCD, caused by neonicotinoids. I say the word alone, even I die a little. Neonicotinoids. Isn't it nice to know the exact name of the exact thing that's killing you? So, starving to death as we were in Midtown Manhattan, what with the neonicotinoids covering our food and smoking us out of our hives. And if that wasn't bad enough, the drought killing off any potentially fresh food source we had, we went a little nomad. We went a little nomad there at the corner of 57th and 7th Avenue. We went a little stark raving nomad. We started with a bicycle. It spoke to us. The handlebars, to be exact. We were 30,000 strong still, and by God, we were going to colonize this delivery bike. We formed a human hive, if you will, collecting on every surface of those handlebars, even though they were chained to a no standing anytime sign, until we were one humming, palpitating mass of handlebar-shaped bees. The symbolism was heart-crushing. A food delivery bike. And when the cops showed up to push us off, we weren't discouraged. We moved on to 56th and Broadway to another symbolic stop along the way, a traffic light. We crowded into the red, producing an almost human cry for stop, if I ever heard one. Oh, it was beautiful. But then we began to lose our numbers. 25,000, then 20,000. Down to 15,000, we were nonetheless determined to go forward. News crews showed up and followed our journey through Midtown one block at a time. We tackled an Empire Szechuan on 56th and 6th. Then we tackled a Banana Republic on 53rd and 5th. They showed up to cover what they quickly realized was no mere colony migration, but a massive, soul-sucking suicide mission, because it was obvious. We were dying. It was clear that we, a single, thriving, gorgeous, honey-making, nectar-loving colony that once, not too long ago, stood 50,000 strong, we were going down. And if we were going down, we were going to take a piece of the world down with us. So we moved on, mad with hunger and rage, until we were only 10,000, then 5,000, then 50. By then, we weren't news anymore. The camera crews closed up and drove away. No giant mass of bees attaching themselves to human objects anymore, they said. Well, then forget about it. We had their attention when our numbers were large and our targets brilliantly symbolic. But nobody hears you buzz on the way out when all that you were swarming is a cardboard coffee cup. Nobody listens or notices That last writhing bit of beef fluff at the edge of Union Square, crawling for his life to that one last rose of summer. The hive is broken now. I am the last bee standing, the last of my colony here to testify, here to make this last plea for my people. How many more of us are out there starving to death in Midtown, starving to death in LA, starving across the ocean? How much longer must we go on this way? When is someone gonna join our fight? Because we're only freaking bees, man. There's only so much we can do alone. Okay, sure. Greenpeace cares. They got the idea. They're doing what they can, but is it enough? I mean, what is it gonna take to make it stop? What's it gonna take to stop the pollution and the pesticides that are destroying us? Don't let my death be in vain. Save the bees. Save my people. Save yourselves. Now. Spare change for the bees. Save the bees. Spare change to save the bees. Oh, thank you, man. God bless you. God bless. Save the bees. Save the bees.
Oh boy. Wow. Well, this is a human problem. Nature isn't doing anything wrong. We are. Our leaders are, our businesses are, and it's up to us together to solve it. I invite you to consider your spheres of influence and leadership. What groups are you part of that you can encourage to apply a climate lens to all their activities? You might want to share something in the chat about what kind of action you might want to take. I'll just let you know that DA Netherlands is planning to provide transit information for all of their events. Let's see what we can all do together. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, and she comes to us from India. It's Karishma Mehrotra, an Indian-American journalist and academic currently on a Fulbright research project studying India's 2020 migrant crisis and digital work. She aims to bridge the gap between academic, creative, and journalistic writing. Thank you so much for being with us today, Karishma.
Hi, everyone. I think there was a video I wanted to share before I begin. Could we get that started?
और एक तरफ से तो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ शॉर्ट में कि इस सभी चीज़ का जितना भी हम लोगों के साथ दुख बीत रही है, एक समझिए तो कोविड-19 से भी ज़्यादा महामारी एनटीपीसी द्वारा जो अपना हक और अधिकार का जब भी आवाज़ उठाते हैं तो हम लोगों को सस्पेंड कर दिया जाता है या फिर नौकरी से बाहर कर दिया जाता है या फिर झूठा मुकदमा में डाल के केस या जेल भेज दिया जाता है। क्या बोलें, यही जो डर, जो कंपनी ने इतना डर पैदा कर दी, सभी का डर हो गया कि जो रोजी में लगे हुए हमको भी निकाल दे, कल उसको निकाल दिया, आज उसको निकाल दे। उसी का डर के चलते लोग आवाज़ नहीं उठा पा रहा है। आवाज़ उठाने वाला लोग जो भी थे हम लोग सभी को आज झूठे मुकदमा में फंसा कर बाहर कर दिए।
यूनियन के पास हम लोग जाते हैं तो अगला विस्थापित जो है ना दबंग डालता है, अगला जो विस्थापित जो होता है ना पैसा दे देता है तो दबंग डाल देता है, काम करना है तो करो नहीं तो जाओ, इस तरह करके धमकी देता है। ये बात हाँ, जमीन खत्म हो गया, सारा जमीन खत्म हो गया। हम लोग जगह जमीन दे के ही हम लोग का 10,000 देता है, हम लोग का कुछ नहीं किया फिर भी हम लोग का 20,000। सबका 8 घंटा ड्यूटी, 8 घंटे में उस सबका 22,000 प्लस और हम लोग का 14,000 प्लस। ये हम लोग मजबूर हैं, कोई साथ देने वाला आगे पीछे नहीं है।
So thank you for this opportunity to speak today. To give you some context about that video, It's basically explaining the differences between government coal workers and private contractors. So the laborers that I had interviewed in that video, those were private contractors, and the coal industry in India is increasingly resorting to this type of outsourcing the labor to people like them rather than full-time, salaried, unionized, stable government jobs. So the first interview you saw was also a contract worker who had been booted out of his job for speaking up. And as a frame of reference, we are talking about a sector in India that directly employs 1.2 million people, with a larger informal ecosystem and several mono economies encompassing up to 20 million lives by some accounts. And my experience with reporting on energy and labor in India somewhat illuminates the nuances of this issue in this country. And keep in mind that my immediate focus has been labor, but much of the lineage of this type of reporting has been the catastrophic land disputes around coal. So I had proposed to a grant body to work on a story about the just transitions, which, as many of you know, is about understanding the effects on labor when we conduct energy transitions. I had proposed this story from Delhi, having spoken to many policy experts, but without much ground reporting outside of the urban center just yet. Once I began the ground reporting is when I realized that there absolutely is no quote unquote energy transition happening in India, at least not in the way that the global north has understood it to be. I found very quickly in the state that I had visited that the pressure to increase production had only intensified. And these findings matched up with what the Environment Minister of India was beginning to say publicly in the aftermath of COP26. Basically, because the energy demand of India is set to increase by tremendous amounts over the coming decades, by some accounts, the entire energy demand of the EU is the additional energy India will need by 2030. So this means that renewables is going to be a chunk of that additional energy, decreasing the overall proportion of energy that comes from coal. But the overall quantum value, the absolute value of coal in this country is not going down in any foreseeable future. And for those of you who are tuned into the COP debates, this is the whole issue of phase down versus phase out that India had brought up. So academics may be able to hypothesize about a coal reduction in India in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, but as a journalist, I have to write about what's happening and not what may or may not happen in the future. But still, I was seeing some significant changes on the ground. The coal industry's escalating pressure to increase production has meant that a much larger reliance on private companies in an industry that was nationalized up until only the 90s. That has meant less accountability and much more dire labor conditions. And in a second story to this series, I had visited a massive solar park in a central Indian state. It was a sea of solar panels as far as the eye could see, but virtually not a soul seen working at the park. This fits into the broader global debate about just transitions that places an emphasis in exploring how to ensure renewables are a source of employment generation. So I wanted to bring this up here just to help us appreciate the obstacles in a country like India that they might face in regards to the transition. And India's continuous labor crisis, further accentuated by COVID, means that the country is facing concerns that need to be recognized and integrated into climate conversation. How to take that forward, whether it's climate financing from the global north to the global south or what have you, I will leave that up to the experts. But I hope this illuminates a segment of the problem at hand. And thank you for having me on here. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, the transition for countries that are developing will be hard, definitely. And that's why, I want to just reiterate that everyone needs to vote for Democrats in the midterms. Not just vote, but vote for Democrats, because Republicans aren't going to do anything for the climate. And we've already had some major climate disasters in our country, one of which was Hurricane Katrina. I'd like to introduce our next guest, Colette Pichon Battle. She's a climate activist and lawyer who founded the Climate Justice and Human Rights Center, the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. She was a TED speaker in 2019, the Obama Foundation Fellow. She's best known for advocating for the needs of communities of color in the face of the climate crisis on the Gulf Coast of the USA. We are honored to give Ms. Battle the floor. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thanks everyone. I want to offer my deep gratitude to Dana, Bruce, and Angela for this invitation. It was a little bit of a shocker for me. I'm not known as the biggest friend to Democrats, but I think what got me here is that I'm an even bigger thorn in the side to the Republicans. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to speak here today. I want to bring you greetings from the traditional lands of the Choctaw Nation in Southeast Louisiana. I'm just outside of New Orleans in St. Tammany Parish. And I want to offer my honor to the original people of all of the lands that you are on. It has been great to see all of the different countries represented on this conversation. And I honor the original people of those lands as well. And it's important for us to acknowledge land because we have to admit, understand, and move on the knowledge that the fight for indigenous sovereignty globally is at the root of this climate justice fight. And we all at least need to know whose original lands we're on and who we need to be engaging with. But I also bring up land because where I live in Southeast Louisiana, we're losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet. And we are already seeing the impacts of the climate crisis here in the United States. It's important that folks on this call understand that the first federal dollars to relocate people in the United States due to the climate crisis was here in South Louisiana. And you should be saddened to know that it was, of course, our indigenous communities that are on the front lines here and are going through that process. And it has not been an easy one. And it's this process and many other social structures that I have been witnessing since Hurricane Katrina almost 17 years ago. And it is a critique of our broader social structure that we've been moving on and working to shift. I'll offer with love my critique of the climate movement and my critique of even some of the comments I heard today, only because if you look at it from a different perspective, which is the perspective of the front lines, you may come to a different conclusion. But the love that I offer is not a criticism. It's information that we need in order to correct our way forward and move together so that we can win this thing, as we heard from Michelle. First, I want to say this is not an atmospheric battle of invisible things and temperatures that nobody can see. This approach by the climate movement has cut out thousands, probably millions of people from even engaging in the subject. To simply talk about carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reduction, and temperatures is to leave out a very critical impact of this reality, which is people. The people are being harmed and they're being harmed now. And we've got to really figure out a way to talk about this issue from a lens of justice and from a position of not just the people on the planet, but the many relatives that crawl around places like my swamp and help us have a very healthy ecosystem, as I'm seeing some of the discussion in the chats and as the monologue brought in with the bees. It's important that we understand that what's being pushed on us right now are technological solutions that are, in fact, further investment in the fossil fuel infrastructure. Folks on the ground in South Louisiana are saying no to carbon capture, no to blue hydrogen, no to green methanol, because what's been taught to us now is that the problem is so great that we need great technological solutions to handle the problem immediately. But it's this false sense of urgency that is rooted in a history of colonization and imperialism that we have to resist. And we're going to have the courage to do things differently. And we're going to have the courage to listen to the people who have to live next to this stuff that's being produced so that many of us don't have to change anything about how we live our lives. Consider, friends, that what we are facing is indeed the need for a moral solution to global injustices that are rooted in imperial and settler colonialism with a history that we are still seeing today. And imagine and understand that what we really need to see is our solutions rooted in what we know to be human rights and the rights of Mother Nature. Now, this is contrary to what we're seeing in the IIJA. What we're seeing are billions of dollars going to fossil fuel companies so that they can do more damage in environmental justice communities, so that we can all feel better about not really changing what we're doing, not really changing what we're saying, and not even challenging our own party and our own side around how we address this problem. But this problem is not a science problem. This problem is an economic problem. This problem is a structural racism problem, and we have to deal with that in a truthful and honest way. We have to, as we just heard from a previous speaker, absolutely prioritize the workers in this energy transition. I cannot agree with the speakers more. We need this now, and we are calling for this energy transition in places like Louisiana and Texas. I mean, this is really where we're seeing some of the best movement on the ground, but we're not seeing any political will. As you might imagine, I live in the red block down here. And there's not only political will, there's messaging and blaming on every single climate impact that we're receiving now and how it connects to the greening of our economy and advancing the infrastructure that we need to see. So what we really need, as you are making those phone calls to get people out to vote, is a real deep understanding of what the real problem is and our own on the ground messaging so that we keep focused on what the solutions really are. We've got to spread our national message by first being in global solidarity with all of the nations that are present on this phone. We worked with the Movement for Black Lives to develop a national Black climate agenda that calls for a recognition of all sovereign nations and all of the treaties that have not been honored, both in our country and around the world. This is not just about correcting history. This is addressing a vulnerability that has been created, and now in this new climate reality will leave the indigenous people on the front lines of this crisis. We have to honor these treaties, not because we want to correct all of the pieces of history, but because we have to build a stronger future. We have to cancel all international debt. Our country, our party isn't calling for this. We have to be strong enough to call for this. The global South is not able to prepare itself for what our nation is ultimately, and maybe a few others, but it really is ours. We are ultimately responsible for. We have to cancel all debt so folks can get ready for what is coming if it has not already landed at their shores. We need to see complete divestment from fossil fuels by this country in our domestic lands and waters and also abroad. We cannot continue to push this urgency of the climate crisis and still invest in dollars and profits on the thing that's accelerating the crisis. And we have to begin to have the bold conversations that dismantle the obstacles that stop people from moving across borders out of the way of climate impacts. This global climate migration that we are seeing everywhere has come to our shores, and we must have a humane policy to deal with it. The work that I'm speaking to you about is not something I've made up in my head. The ground is moving. We've been waiting for the middle class, voting public, educated public to join the ground troops for a very long time. Gulf South for a Green New Deal is 5 states and 1 colonized territory moving in the South to advance a climate justice agenda. Southern Communities for a Green New Deal, 13 Southern states in that red block. We're moving and we're ready. The Red, Black, and Green New Deal with the Movement for Black Lives has established the first national group of Black folks leading on climate. Southern Movement Assembly, Water Equity Climate Resilience Caucus, the Ocean Justice Forum. Folks are moving, the ground is moving, but who we do not have with us are those middle of the road voters who think that this is still a problem about reducing greenhouse gases and carbon. It is not just that. This is an opportunity for us to change our society. This is an opportunity for us to save the planet. We believe in all of these things as Americans. We believe in our exceptionalism. It is time for us to be exceptional in our humility and exceptional in what we give and exceptional in having the courage to say that we have taken too much. And for 5% of the population to consume almost a quarter of the world's energy, it's time for us as Americans to be accountable, to be responsible, and to have the courage to lead on this issue. The ground is ready. All we're missing are the people in the middle who have not yet decided what to do. So I leave with this Bishop Desmond Tutu, who says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I want to ask all of us who have not yet been catalyzed into this work, not just to sign on to policies that have been put in front of you, but to question what is the ground saying about these policies. I want to say, please move off of the middle fence and come over to the side of fighting for what we need. This is not just about helping those poor people on the front lines. This is about all of us. We will not win unless we have all of us, and now is the time. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. What an incredible, articulate address. We have so much to learn from you, and I hope that we can stay in touch and help lead and teach and guide each other. The chat box has been exploding. You have an audience of great fans here, and we are really grateful for your time and your presence today. I think we all need to do something. We live all over the globe. We and Democrats abroad, we are witness to the devastating impact of climate change already all over the world. We are witness to Indigenous people and the impact of this crisis on them. And we can all act, we can all have an impact. If you would like to join us at the ECCC, at the Environmental and Climate Crisis Council at Democrats Abroad, please join us, volunteer with us. Let's find a way of putting your ideas and your passion into action. The moderator is going to put our volunteer button and our join button in the chat, so please join us. And next, I want to turn to introducing a very special guest. He's very special to me and to Democrats Abroad. Is Aaron Fishbone. He is based in Bratislava, Slovakia, and he is the Director of Policy for Greenway, the largest provider of electric vehicle charging solutions in Central and Eastern Europe. During the 2020 election cycle, he was actually the Global Comms Director of Democrats Abroad. Many of you might recognize him. He did an extraordinary job of leading us through the elections and making sure that we at Democrats Abroad really were the margin of difference in flipping the administration. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to my friend, Aaron. Aaron?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm a little sick, so it's a little bit, voice is a little crackly. Thank you so much, Dana, for Angela, Bruce, everyone else who's put this wonderful event together. Colette, that was wonderful to hear. Thank you. It's going to be a bit hard to follow, Colette, and I'm going to obviously come, or not obviously, but I am going to come at this from a different angle. But I think it takes all sides in order to, we need all different approaches now in order to make this a possibility. Since this is a rally, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Sunrise Movement, people who've been pushing the agenda so far. And you know what, whether or not we got to keep pushing in order to keep getting more and more, because the global climate crisis is in fact indeed that, a crisis. I had sent you all a PowerPoint presentation, but I think in light of the timing, and I think in light of the fact that this is a rally, we don't need to do that. It was a fairly data-driven presentation about the state of global e-mobility and whatnot. But so I will step back. I live in Bratislava, Slovakia. I work in Central and Eastern Europe, and I work on the energy transition and the e-mobility transition throughout Europe, because I work on EU level policy. So the European Green Deal has a whole element of public policy and regulation that is dedicated to how to build and regulate an electric vehicle, or how to develop the electric vehicle segment, how to build a charging infrastructure network and a system that works for people to enable the transition from current combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. And so I work on that. I also work in Slovakia, which is the largest exporter per capita of combustion engine vehicles in the world, and also in Europe. So I work on sort of two tracks. And I just got off a call right before this one. I was on a call with a group of people, and we are trying to rally together the champions of e-mobility from this region, a region that is much lower GDP per capita than Western and Northern Europe, a region that is much lower level of electrified transport than those other parts of Europe, and a region where the policymakers out here, up until the invasion of Ukraine and even since then, are extremely conservative in trying to slow walk the transition to e-mobility. Because A, our countries produce raw materials for fossil fuels. B, because they reliant upon their auto production for export, for GDP and employment within the countries. and C, because they're just not necessarily, and they're small markets and the people don't have a lot of money to spend. So if we transition too quickly, what vehicles are the people going to drive? I live in a region where people spend 2,000 euros to buy a third or fourth hand Mercedes-Benz car, and they're not necessarily going to buy a 35,000 cheap electric vehicle, affordable Volkswagen or Skoda electric vehicle to replace that. Those are fundamentally different consumers. So it's a huge, the issue of, let's say, the just transition, whether it's about coal miners or whether it's about people who work in the factories, with relatively low skilled labor producing cars, or just normal people who have jobs that are completely unrelated to energy or e-mobility, although there are no jobs that are unrelated to energy anymore, but still need to buy a vehicle for their own personal life, is a huge issue. And so policymakers reflect that in the debates, that the position of Czech Republic, the position of Slovakia, the position of Hungary at the level of European debates. So I just got off a call before this, gathering together a group of players from around the region, from Hungary, from Czech Republic, from Croatia, where we are building this thing called the Green Transport Initiative to encourage to provide a sort of a countervailing force in the political narrative about that this region cannot do it, that the people here are not in support of it, because we see the demand in our own utilization numbers, in the sales that we're seeing from vehicles, and also in the utilization numbers of our charging infrastructure. There are activists working together. So we're bringing all of these voices together to provide a countervailing narrative from the region that we should go faster and we can do it and people want it. B, that there are local industries that will flourish and prosper, local companies that will flourish and prosper, that will provide jobs locally, that the energy transition can and should be an opportunity, not something to be feared, but something to be taken advantage of. And now, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, with everything going on there, that e-mobility is promoted, rightly so, as the way to reduce reliance on oil. Also, in Europe as well as in the United States. And so this is all happening. This is all happening very actively. It's going forward at the European level. We're working on policy making under the European Green Deal to work on public charging infrastructure and the driver experience, how charging infrastructure can be a part of energy efficiency of buildings, of the lived environment. And look, I'm a bike commuter, so taking transit, walking, biking, horseback riding, whatever, are all better than driving vehicles. But if you're going to drive a vehicle, let it be electric. And that's what we're trying to get at. It's coming for heavy duty vehicles, and it's coming for maritime as well as aerospace. Look, I can say that in the United States, a lot has happened thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure piece of legislation. $7.5 billion to be invested in the United States in charging infrastructure. Okay, I'll be done in 30 seconds. In charging infrastructure, the U.S. Department of Transport and Department of Energy created a joint office of energy and transport in order to coordinate these investments and make sure this is done smartly. And there's $2.5 billion to be given to states for other identified priorities, like reaching hard-to-reach communities, rural communities, frontline communities, and whatnot, in order to make this transition work for everybody. Electric vehicles and charging infrastructure have a huge role to play in balancing the electricity grid and reducing the overall need for more and more energy generation. What energy is generated should ultimately become more and more decarbonized. So what you can do is, obviously, I have my own timer, obviously, some old habits die hard. Vote, obviously. As a former DA communications director, I can say that we were hugely influential. There wouldn't be a bipartisan infrastructure bill if there wasn't a Biden-Harris administration or a 50-50 Senate, thanks to what we did in Georgia. Also, you can be an EV ambassador, which means try out an electric vehicle for yourself. You'll find it's just a better car. And if you have one or have access to one, share it with someone else. Let them have the experience. And finally, be a myth buster. There's a lot of myths about e-mobility out there that need to be busted, like the fact that they're less clean than combustion engine vehicles, all of which is in the PowerPoint presentation that I shared, and maybe the team can share it out with all the attendees afterwards. But anyway, thank you very much for the chance to be here. We all need to do everything we can on all of our fronts and in all of our spaces.
Thank you, Aaron. I would definitely love an electric vehicle one day. Before we get to our next speaker, I just want to let everybody know that as part of the ECCC's Get Out the Vote efforts, we're asking people to make a video to alert people about the importance of our government taking meaningful climate action, and also to vote. Somebody's going to put the link in the chat, but our climate vote initiative is going on, and it's really important. And anybody who makes a video will be totally thrilled. So with that, I would like to introduce Bruce Murray. He is the chair of the Democrats Abroad Global Progressive Caucus. He is a semi-retired professor at the University of Illinois and is currently teaching a course on EU and US climate mitigation at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. Bruce is also a proud member of the Climate Reality Project Leadership Corps. Bruce.
Thank you very much, Angela. When joining the Climate Reality Project Leadership Corps, trainees receive a sobering reality check. Our former Vice President Al Gore presents the IPCC science succinctly, posits the 1.5 centigrade goal, then describes current climate change consequences unrelentingly. As he speaks, we see devastating images of drought and flooding, humongous forest fires, killer hurricanes, giant tornadoes, surging tsunamis, mighty rain bombs, and more. Riveting our attention on this inconvenient truth, he leaves not the slightest shred of doubt. Our situation is very serious, and the need for big, bold action on a global scale is extremely urgent. With that, we have the answer to his first question. Must we change? Yes, we must. Then comes the second, can we change? Just as compellingly as he portrays the problem, the former vice president lays out what we can do to turn the corner on greenhouse gas emissions, transition swiftly to a renewable energy economy, and achieve climate justice in the process. Here are some examples. 5 years ago, we had already exceeded the 2000 estimate for 2010 wind production by 16 times. We had exceeded a similar estimate for solar energy production by 75 times. And renewable energy production in individual countries like Chile was soaring off the charts. Since then, the transition has accelerated as the price of solar and wind energy continues to drop, while the market share for some fossil fuels like coal shrinks. The major automakers' commitment to discontinue combustible engine production during the next dozen years is just one of many more trends indicating that we can and we are changing. That was very welcome news to the trainees in my 2021 cohort. So too was the knowledge that countless others had gone before us and that we alone constituted what amounted to a small army of more than 2,500. By the way, some are among us today. Yes, we are a force that can make a difference, and we are by no means alone. The more than 190 Paris Agreement signatories are working increasingly effectively now, leading to the COP26 completion of the Paris Rulebook, Global Methane Pledge, and firm commitment to an annual investment of $100 billion to assist developing world members in meeting their nationally determined contribution goals. More ambitious EU and US and other pledges also suggest reason for hope. So too, the state and municipal achievements like the impressive 2021 Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, allocating 60% of its resources to underserved communities. However, hope is not enough. If we are to succeed, we must unite with forces who recognize the urgency of a now and stand ready to act. That includes all of our rally speakers, the organizations they represent, and others like Green Police, the Sierra Club, Sunrise Movement, and Fridays for Future. It especially includes the inspiring founder of 350.org and Third Act, a true climate action champion, Bill McKibben. Bill, the floor is yours.
Hello there, and greetings from the Green Mountains of Vermont. It's a real pleasure to be with you all, and a real pleasure to have been hearing everybody who's talking here today. I especially enjoyed listening to Karishma from India and then from Colette down on the Gulf. Just powerful reminders of all the realities that we're dealing with right now. I want to say just a few words about where the world stands right now. We're at a very interesting point. Events in Ukraine have reminded us that there are three powerful reasons to get off fossil fuel and to do it as fast as we can. One is that it helps despots everywhere. Because it's limited in supply and concentrated in a few places, those who control those few places end up with a great deal of unwarranted power. Be they Vladimir Putin, 60% of the funding for his army comes from selling oil and gas is the weapon he's used to keep Europe cowering. Whether it's the King of Saudi Arabia, whether in our own country, it's the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, who used their winnings to buy up one of our political parties and degrade and deform small d democracy along the way. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, which in the rich world we tend to forget about sometimes, is the sheer level of pollution that comes from combusting fossil fuel. We think about 9 million people by the latest study are killed annually breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. That's more than die from COVID, HIV, AIDS, malaria, TB, war, and terrorism combined. And it's all unnecessary because we have the technology now to dispense with it. And the third most existential reason, the one I've spent my life working on, is the fact that burning fossil fuel is destroying the climate system of the planet. The temperature went to 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic last month. If that doesn't cause you to be truly worried, then something's wrong. Temperature today on the subcontinent as we speak is nearing 120 degrees Fahrenheit. We're still in April. We're at the very edge already, and we have to get off fossil fuel, and we can get off fossil fuel, and fast if we want to. The price of renewable energy has dropped 90% in the last decade. It's now the cheapest way to generate power in most of the world. The reason that we're not doing it is obvious, the combination of inertia, but more so toxic vested interest. The fossil fuel industry has been a force for retrograde villainy on this planet for 30 years. We know now that they lied systematically about what they knew about climate change. And we know now that they are pushing to delay this transition with everything they've got. You need no further than Joe Biden's attempts to get the Build Back Better bill passed. Would be the first serious climate legislation the US Congress has ever passed. And there are 50 Republican senators lined up squarely against it. Sadly, they're joined by one Democrat, Joe Manchin, who's taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than anybody else in Washington. And it's been money well spent. The return on investment is high because he's blocked hundreds of billions of dollars in desperately needed funding to make this transition happen at the pace that physics demands. That ability of Manchin to derail the Biden administration for a year has been very painful to watch. The Biden administration has many good people in it, want to work hard on climate change, but they've A, been unable to get what they need through Congress, and B, pulled their punches with executive action, I think, for fear of offending Manchin and making his vote that much harder to get. So one way around that, of course, would be to come back to a Congress after November that had enough Democratic senators that Manchin was no longer an issue, that had enough Democrats to control the House so we could continue to send legislation that way. I'm not particularly a partisan Democrat. I told you I was from Vermont, so you can guess where who my political guru has been these last years. But I am rational enough to understand that we're going to get nowhere unless we have some room for the Biden administration to really work. We also need, and this is an important part of the work of Democrats, to be reminding the Biden administration to do the things they said they were going to do. It's painful right now with the war in Ukraine underway to watch them acceding to the wishes of the natural gas industry and building out new infrastructure, but so far not taking up the efforts of many environmentalists, myself included, to have a Marshall Plan style effort to bring renewable technology in scale off to Europe to help break Putin's biggest weapon before it gets cold again next October. Heat pumps for peace and freedom is the rallying cry that lots of people are gathering around, but so far not the White House. So those of you who have influence there, use it. And all of us need to be pushing back really hard against the voter suppression that is diminishing power in faith in our democracy. The irony of the situation is we've won the messaging war here. 70% of Americans understand that climate change is a real and pressing problem and want action on it. But our government remains beholden too often to the fossil fuel industry, and so we need to be able to break that as soon as we can. The 50 senators in the Republican Party were a perfect example, and Joe Manchin in the Democratic Party is a perfect example too. We need to move past that as fast as we possibly can, because time in the end, and here is where I will finish, time is the absolute arbiter here. This is not like other political problems that we face. As long as I've been alive, we've been arguing about healthcare, and it's a shame and a crime that we haven't provided it to everybody. Someday we probably will, like every other industrialized country. And when we finally do, the fact that we didn't do it for 50 years won't make it harder to do. But that's not how climate change works. If we don't solve this soon, and the IPCC has said we need to cut emissions in half before the decade is out, then we will never solve it, because there is no backup plan. There's no plan to refreeze the Arctic once it's melted. We're in a very desperate situation here. We need everybody acting outside their comfort zone, because the planet is well outside its comfort zone. Individual action can't make it happen at this point. You can't make the carbon math work 1 Tesla at a time. The most important thing that an individual can do is join together with other individuals in movements large enough to shift the basic political and economic ground rules here, just as Colette was describing. And if we can make that happen, we need to hope that perhaps the Democratic Party can be one of the vehicles for making that shift. And I will say that I think its future as a party depends on its ability to lead that fight. Take seriously the fact that polling shows young people are becoming increasingly disaffected with the administration that they did more than anyone else to elect. Climate change is the biggest issue for young voters. And that's one reason that politically savvy people should probably be taking it with even more seriousness than they do at the moment. This is a desperate time. It's also a time of some opportunity to think more clearly about the world than we usually do. So try to remember those 3 reasons: pollution, despotism, existential risk of climate destruction, that we need to right now, shut down coal and oil and gas and move as fast as is humanly possible to the power of the sun and of the wind. Thank you all for being part of that fight. On we go.
Thank you, Bill McKibben from 350.org. The big systemic change that you were talking about is something that the Progressive Caucus and Democrats Abroad remains focused on. We want to raise awareness that we can have a more representative democracy, that we can work to get big money and retrograde, villainous vested interests out of our political processes, so that we can have policies that work for the people and for the planet, and not just for the profit of a small number of greedy people. So I invite folks to join the Progressive Caucus of Democrats Abroad and volunteer with us to help enact the bold change that will position the Democrats for more wins in 2022 and will lead to a party that can lead the way to the kind of change we need, that we heard from so many of our wonderful speakers today. And now we have Dan and Deb LoCascio, and they're going to share a song with us that they're going to play live. They're coming in from Austria, where Danny has performed for over 20 years, as well as in other countries and including the USA. This is Jackson Browne's After the Deluge. Take it away, Deb and Dan.
Okay. Okay, I'd also like to introduce my daughter Monica, who's going to be singing with us as well. Very poignant, but I think kind of a pessimistic song, but I think it helps us to realize what we need to do. Anyway, Jackson Browne, Before the Deluge. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them were dreamers, some of them were fools, who were making plans and thinking of the future. And with the energy of the innocent, they were gathering the tools they would need to make their journey back to nature. And while the sand slipped through the opening and their hands reached for the golden ring, with their hearts they turned to each other's hearts for refuge. The troubled years that came before the deluge. Some of them knew pleasure, some of them knew pain, and for some of them it was only the moment that mattered. And on the brave and crazy waves of you, they were riding around in the rain, and their feathers once so fine grew torn and tattered. And in the end they traded their tired wings for the resignation that living brings, and exchanged love's bright and fragile glow for the glitter and the rouge. And in a moment they were swept before the deluge. Let the music keep our spirits high. Let the buildings keep our children dry. Let creation reveal its secrets by and by. By and by. When the light that's lost within us reaches the sky. Some of them were angry at the way the earth was abused by the men who learn how to forge her beauty and power, and they struggle to protect you from them, only to be confused by the magnitude of the fury in the final hour. And when the sand was gone and the time arrived, in the naked dawn only a few survived. And in attempts to understand a thing so simple and so huge, believe that they were meant to live after the deluge. Let the music keep our spirits high. Let the buildings keep our children dry.
reaches the sky. Let the music keep our spirits high. Let the buildings keep our children dry. Let creation reveal its secrets by and by. By and by, when the light that's lost within us reaches the sky, reaches the sky, reaches the sky.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for that beautiful performance.
Thank
What
you.
a poignant and appropriate song
It is.
for us today. Thank
It
you
was
so
written in the
much.
70s, but it's still perfect. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, each of us needs to play our parts in trying to curb climate change. Sometimes the smallest things can make a difference if we all do it together. But to better understand what our carbon footprint is, I thought I would provide for you a link today for an interesting carbon footprint calculator, which you could all use. Check it out, see how you might change your everyday lifestyle. And our moderator is going to put that in the chat. Then I'd like to introduce an old friend to Democrats Abroad, David Miller. He is the co-founder and CEO of Ambient Carbon, which is developing a methane eradication photochemical system. Very interesting. David is also the founder and former chair of Democrats Abroad Denmark. We are so happy and honored to have him back with us today. So David, tell us all about your amazing innovation and how it's going to help us.
Hey, thanks, Udana. My company, Ambient Carbon, is building MEPS. It's methane eradication photochemical system, and it was invented at the University of Copenhagen by American professor Matthew Johnson. It eradicates methane from low concentration, that's non-flammable sources such as a cow or a pig barn, a slurry tank, coal mines, water treatment plants, etc. Methane is the most significant greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide. The concentration of methane in the ambient air is only about 2 parts per million compared to about 412 parts per million for CO2 currently. Yet methane is 86 times more powerful than CO2 measured over a 20-year period. And nature eradicates methane in the air over 10 to 20 years. MEPS eradicates methane in about 10 to 15 seconds. It uses chlorine gas and ultraviolet light to eradicate methane in a closed system. And it's safe, efficient, it's affordable, it's scalable. And human-caused methane makes up about 60% of methane emissions globally. One of the most significant sources is actually livestock. And then the most significant source of methane from fossil fuel production, which, by the way, we have to stop, is from mining coal as the methane seeps from the coal mine or mining pit. And we're currently developing MEPS to be used to eradicate methane from livestock barns as well as coal mines. And MEPS uses a 40-foot shipping container as the reaction chamber. And a typical cow barn would use one shipping container to eradicate 30 metric tons, I should say, of methane a year at a concentration of about 50 parts per million. And at a price of about $2,400 for a ton of methane, which translates to about $29 a ton of CO2 equivalent. Now, a coal mine would use 90 shipping containers strung together in sections of 6 containers each to eradicate methane about over 32,000 metric tons from a coal mine. So it's a real lot, and at a concentration of about 3,500 parts per million. And yet the price would be about $854 a metric ton of methane, and that translates to about $10 a ton of the CO2 equivalent. So we have to stop mining coal, but even abandoned coal mines release large amounts of methane. So rather than waiting for the coal mines to shut down, we need to get rid of the methane in the meantime, as the climate crisis is too severe. Now, the traditional argument by environmental NGOs, and by the way, I am a member of the Climate Reality Project, is that by getting rid of CO2 and methane, you're just giving a license to the fossil fuel industry to keep producing fossil fuels. So using this logic, we shouldn't remove plastic from the oceans because then we're just giving a license to the packaging industry to keep producing plastic packaging. So by not doing anything about our greenhouse gas emissions, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. We need to stop using coal, but the computer or phone you're currently using to attend this rally, let alone the bike, bus, train, or car you ride every day, is made from steel. And a certain kind of coal that burns at high temperature is needed to make that steel. Coal companies need a transition to producing hydrogen sustainably in order that steel can be made and you can continue to use computers and phones and bikes and buses. We also need to cut down on the amount of meat and dairy we consume. We produce enough food in the world to feed everyone, but there's a problem with distribution where there's too much food in the rich world and not enough in poorer parts of the world. There are a lot of problems to solve. In the meantime, we need not only to cut our emissions of greenhouse gases, but also remove excess CO2 in the ambient air. There's too much of it, and that's what's causing the Earth to heat up. This includes removing CO2 that results from methane, because whether by nature, by flaring high concentration methane, or via MEPS, each ton of powerful methane results in 2.75 tons of CO2, which lasts 100 or even up to 1,000 years in the ambient air. So after we've developed MEPS, we will be focusing on removing concentrated CO2 from MEPS exhaust, as well as CO2 from the ambient air. So, thank you.
David, thank you very, very much. As a matter of fact, thanks to all of our amazing speakers, performers, and to all who have worked behind the scenes to rally us to action today. Now, allow me to return to Al Gore for a moment, calling his Climate Reality Project questions. Must we change? Yes, we must. Can we change? Yes, we can. We learned that today. Al asks a third question, will we change? Well, we hold the answer to that question. Our speakers and performers encourage us to unite with them, to answer loudly and clearly. Yes, we will change. Following their lead, ProDA is eager to continue its collaboration with the DA Environment and Climate Crisis Council, seizing opportunities to take big and bold action. We are committed to accelerate climate change mitigation in the Democratic Party, in the United States, and around the world. For us, that means building on the legislative efforts of 2021, joining the ECCC in urging the Biden-Harris administration to declare a national climate emergency now, and supporting candidates who are ready to get the job done. Look for a follow-up message from us in the coming days with suggestions for our next steps and an invitation to join us. Everybody, yes, we will change. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Bruce. And it's been such a pleasure collaborating with the Progressive Caucus and putting together this event. I also want to thank all the incredible speakers and performers who joined us here today. This was inspiring. This was rousing. I think this gave us all a lot of vitamins and inspiration to act. I want to leave us with some beautiful music, some visual and oral art to set us on our way. We are honored today to have Reg Hudson and his video of which is called Expand Your Mind. Reg is a musician, an artist, a record producer, and he resides in Spain. He has a long history of combining music with activism. His recent track, Expand Your Mind, endeavors to raise awareness about climate change. I do think it's the perfect way to tie up our event. Let the beauty of our earth inspire you. So enjoy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Harald and I am with the Hudson's People Band. The song we are going to present to you, Expand Your Mind, was written by Rex Hudson and John Davis a long time ago in the 80s. And when John Davis sadly passed away last year, Rex decided to make a new modernized version of the song. The idea is to bring awareness to the young people that climate change is real, and it's time now to act and do something about it. So, thank you for listening, thank you for watching. This is the Hudson's People with Expand Your Mind.
So many times we only see the wrong in someone else, but there is good in every one of us, and we should not forget it. Oh no, we also have our little friends. Without them we could not live. I mean the birds and bees, flowers and the trees. Expand your mind to sunshine and love. Open up to everything around you. Expand your mind, oh baby, the things around you. Oh, why don't you open up and let the sun shine in? I used to be a selfish guy, thinking only of myself. One day when I was alone, it seemed that nature talked to me. I heard a voice say, realize, stop and think what you're doing to this world. Expand your mind, open up yourself, open up yourself, expand your mind to sunshine and love. Open up
So thank you all so much for coming. And I think that we'll call it a day or an evening or a morning, wherever you are in the world. We're so grateful that you came, that you participated, that you shared. And we hope that you have learned something, been a little bit inspired, and will take some action to help save our beautiful planet. See you soon.